It was a busy afternoon in the middle of the city. The sun was shining, but the air was cold, cutting through the jackets of people rushing to get somewhere. Everywhere you looked, there were crowds. People were walking fast, talking on their phones, holding coffee cups, or checking their watches. Nobody really had time to stop. In a place this big, everyone is always in a hurry, focused on their own problems and their own days. The noise of the traffic and the chatter of the crowd created a loud wall of sound that seemed to block out everything else. In the middle of all this chaos, a man was walking slowly near the park entrance. He didn't look like the other people who were rushing. He looked heavy, as if he was carrying a big weight on his shoulders. He was dressed in simple clothes, a bit worn out, and he kept his head down most of the time. Walking right beside him, struggling to keep up with his slow, heavy steps, was a small dog. It wasn't a fancy dog with a shiny coat. It looked like a mixed breed, maybe some terrier in there, with scruffy fur and big, hopeful eyes. The dog seemed to be the only happy thing on that sidewalk. While the man looked down at his feet, the dog looked up at him. The little tail was wagging back and forth, thumping lightly against the dog's own legs. To the dog, this wasn't a sad day. This was an adventure. The dog trusted the man completely. Every time the man stopped, the dog would stop and sit down, looking up with a silly grin, waiting for a pat on the head or a kind word. The dog thought they were together, a team, and that nothing bad could ever happen as long as they were side by side. But the man's face told a different story. He looked stressed and tired. He kept looking around, his eyes darting from the street to the buildings and then to the park gate. He looked like he was trying to find something, or maybe he was trying to find the courage to do something he knew he shouldn't do. He didn't look at the dog. He kept his eyes on the ground, avoiding the happy look the animal was giving him. It was painful to watch. Like seeing a secret that was about to spill out, they finally stopped near a bench, just a little bit away from the main crowd. The man took a deep breath and let it out slowly, his shoulders dropping. He bent down and fumbled with the leash. His hands were shaking a little bit. For a second, it looked like he was just going to take a break or tie his shoe. The dog, excited that they had stopped, jumped up a little, licking the man's hand. The dog had no idea that this was the end. It just knew that its person was right there. The man didn't pull away, but he didn't pet the dog either. He just unbuckled the metal clip on the leash. It made a sharp, small click sound that nobody else heard in the noisy street. When the leash was loose, the man stood up straight. He didn't say a word. He didn't say goodbye or I'm sorry. He just turned around. At first, the dog didn't understand. It stood there for a split second, watching the man walk away. The little tail was still wagging, waiting for the man to turn back and laugh, waiting for this to be a game. But the man kept walking. He put his hands in his pockets and walked faster, merging into the stream of people on the sidewalk. He didn't look back. Not once. It was like he was trying to run away from his own conscience, moving quickly to distance himself from the living thing he had just left behind. That was when the panic set in. The dog realized that the person it loved was leaving. The animal let out a loud bark, a sharp sound of confusion and fear. It started to run. The little paws scrambled on the hard concrete as the dog chased after the man. It ran past people's legs, dodging shoes and shopping bags, desperate to catch up. The dog barked again, as if to say, "Wait. You forgot me. I'm here." The man heard it. Anyone within hearing distance heard it. But he didn't stop. He just walked faster, becoming just another face in the crowd, disappearing behind a bus. The dog couldn't keep up. The traffic light changed and a wall of cars moved between them. The dog was forced to stop at the curb, panting heavily, its heart beating fast. Suddenly, the dog was alone. The man was gone. The reality of the situation hit the animal like a physical blow. The tail stopped wagging. The ears dropped down flat against the head. The dog stood on the busy sidewalk, surrounded by hundreds of legs, but completely isolated. It looked left, then right. The little animal turned in circles, sniffing the air, hoping to catch a familiar scent. But all it could smell was car exhaust and cold air. People walked by. A woman in a long coat stepped around the dog without even looking down. A group of teenagers laughed at a video on their phone, walking right past the distressed animal. A businessman, talking loudly on a headset, almost tripped over the dog but just kept walking, annoyed that something was in his way. The city didn't care. The city kept moving, indifferent to the tragedy that had just happened on the sidewalk. The dog was confused. It couldn't understand why its human had left. It sat down on the cold pavement, right near the spot where the man had unclipped the leash. It let out a low whine, a sound so sad that it could break your heart. The dog looked at the faces passing by, eyes wide and wet, looking for a familiar face. But everyone was a stranger. The dog shivered, not just from the cold wind, but from the fear of being truly alone in a world that was too big and too loud. Just a few minutes ago, that dog had a home. It had a person. Now it had nothing. It was just another piece of lost luggage in a city that never stops. The dog lowered its head onto its paws, watching the legs of the pedestrians go by, waiting and hoping, even though hope was starting to fade away. The bond had been broken by a single, cruel choice, and now the dog was left to pay the price. The worst part was, the dog still loved the man who left. It still looked at the crowd, hoping to see him coming back, not understanding that he was gone for good. The minutes dragged on, and the situation on the sidewalk became even more heartbreaking. The small dog remained in the exact same spot, like a statue made of sadness. The excitement of the chase had faded, replaced by a heavy, crushing reality. The animal sat with its back paws stretched out and its front paws tucked in, lowering its head until its chin nearly touched the cold concrete. Every time a pair of shoes walked by, the dog's ears would perk up just a little, and its eyes would dart sideways, hoping to see those familiar boots returning. But every time it was just a stranger, someone rushing to a meeting, someone laughing at a joke, someone living a life that had nothing to do with the lonely creature on the ground. The indifference of the city was truly deafening. Hundreds of people were passing through that exact spot every minute. It wasn't that they were cruel people. It was just that they were all so busy. In a big city, people learn to put blinders on. They see so many sad things every day that if they stopped to help every single one, they would never get anywhere. They saw the dog, but they didn't really see it. To them, it was just an obstacle on the sidewalk, something to step around. A young woman talking on her phone actually had to swerve her stroller to avoid hitting the dog, but she never missed a beat of her conversation. A man eating a sandwich dropped a crumb near the dog, and the poor animal sniffed at it, too sad to even eat. But the man just walked away. The wind picked up, rustling the few dry leaves near the park entrance. The dog shivered violently. It was not built for this kind of weather. The scruffy fur wasn't thick enough to keep out the chill, and without the warmth of a home or the comfort of a human hand, the cold was biting deep. The dog let out a long, low sigh that seemed to come from the very bottom of its chest. It was the sound of giving up. The tail, which had been wagging so hopefully just a little while ago, was now curled completely underneath the body. The dog was shrinking into itself, trying to take up as little space as possible in a world that felt so hostile and empty. While this heartbreaking scene was playing out, a figure was approaching from the other side of the street. He was walking at a steady, relaxed pace, unlike the rushing commuters around him. He was dressed simply in a dark coat and wore a small backpack on one shoulder. He had a baseball cap pulled down low, shielding his face, but he moved with a quiet energy. Most people didn't recognize him, or if they did, they were polite enough to give him space. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't listening to music with giant headphones. He was just walking, taking in the world around him. This man, whose name the world knows, has always been different from the typical celebrity. He doesn't walk through life thinking he is above everyone else. He walks with his head up, his eyes open. He notices things. He notices the way the light hits the buildings. He notices the shopkeepers sweeping their sidewalks, and on this day he noticed the small, huddled shape near the bench. At first he didn't stop. He kept walking, passing right by the spot. But then he slowed down. Something in his brain registered that the image he had just seen didn't fit the pattern of a normal busy city street. He stopped about 10 feet away and turned around. He looked back at the dog. He didn't react with the usual pity that people feel. He reacted with curiosity and concern. He stood there for a moment, observing. He watched as a group of tourists walked past, pointing at buildings, completely ignoring the animal at their feet. He watched the dog flinch as a car backfired loudly nearby. He saw the way the dog's eyes were fixed on the ground, empty of hope. He realized that this wasn't a dog waiting for someone. This was a dog that had been left behind. The man turned fully and walked back toward the animal. He moved slowly, not wanting to startle the creature. He didn't march over like he owned the place, and he didn't wave his hands around to get attention. He just approached with a calm, steady energy. He stopped a few feet away and crouched down. He wasn't crouching because his legs were tired. He was crouching so he could be on the same level as the dog. He wanted to be an equal, not a giant standing over it. From this lower position he looked around. He scanned the faces of the people nearby. He looked at the entrance of the park to see if maybe someone was running out of the bush, calling out a name. He checked the coffee shop line to see if a frantic owner was looking for a lost pet. He was looking for the context. He was looking for a reason why this beautiful, living animal was sitting alone on the hard concrete. He did this for a long time, maybe 30 seconds or a minute, just watching and waiting, but there was no one. The man who had walked away was long gone, and nobody else was stepping up to claim the dog. The streets were filled with people, but the dog was an orphan. The man in the cap realized that he was the only one who had stopped. He was the only one who had broken the rhythm of his day to see what was happening. The crowd kept flowing around him like water around a rock, indifferent and noisy, while he remained a still point of focus in the chaos. He looked at the dog again, really looking this time. He saw the dirt on its paws and the sadness in its eyes. He saw that the dog was trembling. A look of what can only be described as deep empathy crossed his face. His eyebrows furrowed slightly, and his mouth set in a firm line. He wasn't just looking at a stray animal. He was looking at a living being that was in pain. And for him, seeing pain and not doing something about it wasn't an option. He stayed there for a moment longer, making sure the dog wasn't injured or aggressive. He saw that the dog was just scared. The dog still hadn't looked at him. It was too afraid to hope again. But the man waited. He knew that trust takes time. He knew that he couldn't just rush in and grab the dog. He had to let the dog know that he was safe. The city noise roared around them, horns honking, sirens wailing, people shouting, but in that small bubble of space between the man and the dog, everything was quiet. It was just a human being deciding to care for another creature that the world had forgotten. He shifted his weight, settling in, ready to stay as long as it took to make things right. The man didn't make any sudden moves. He knew that if he stood up too quickly or reached out too fast, the small dog would panic. Animals speak a language of body language, and right now, the dog was reading fear in everything around it. So the man stayed down. He lowered himself even more, eventually sitting right on the edge of the dirty curb. He didn't care that his nice pants were touching the dusty concrete. He didn't care about the dirt or the people walking behind him staring. He just wanted to be small, to be on the same level as the trembling creature. For a long time, he didn't try to touch the dog at all. He just sat there, a few feet away, looking at the ground. He was letting the dog get used to his presence. He was showing the dog that he wasn't a threat. In a world where the last human the dog trusted had walked away, trust was a very fragile thing. It was like trying to hold water in your hands. If you squeezed too tight, it would just slip away. The man understood this instinctively. He sat with his hands resting loosely on his knees, his palms open and facing up. It is a universal sign of peace, a way of saying, I have no weapons, I am not here to hurt you. The dog watched him with wide, suspicious eyes. The animal was still curled up tight, trying to make itself invisible. It let out a small, cautious growl, a tiny warning sound that said, Stay back. I'm scared. The man didn't pull away or get angry when he heard the growl. He didn't scold the dog or tell it to be quiet. He just respected the boundary. He kept his eyes downcast, blinking slowly. In the animal world, a direct stare can be a challenge, but looking away is a sign of respect. By looking away, he was telling the dog, "I respect you. You are safe." Slowly, the dog's body language began to change. The ears, which had been pinned flat against the head in fear, started to lift just a tiny bit. The dog's nose twitched, sniffing the air. The wind was carrying the man's scent toward the animal. He smelled like fresh air, like fabric softener, and something distinctly kind. He didn't smell like anger or danger. The dog tilted its head to the side, confused. Why was this human sitting there? Why wasn't he leaving like the other one? The man began to make a soft noise. It wasn't a loud whistle or a shout. It was a low humming sound, almost like a tune, but quieter. It was a sound meant to soothe, to cut through the noise of the traffic and the shouting people. The sound vibrated in his chest, a steady, reassuring rhythm. It was the kind of sound that a mother makes to calm a baby or a friend makes to comfort someone who is crying. It was a sound that said, "I am here. I'm not going anywhere." Hearing that gentle voice, the dog felt a strange pull. The instinct to run was fighting with the desperate need for comfort. The dog was cold, lonely, and hungry. It had been abandoned, but its heart was still built to connect. Slowly, painfully slowly, the dog uncurled its legs. It lifted its body off the ground, crouching low, ready to spring away if it had to. But it didn't run. It took one small step toward the man. Then another dot. The man stayed perfectly still, barely even breathing. He watched the dog inch closer out of the corner of his eye, but he didn't turn his head. He didn't want to break the spell. He let the dog come to him. This was important. The dog had to choose. It couldn't be forced. The dog sniffed the man's shoe, then his ankle. The man didn't move. He let the dog investigate him, letting the animal learn who he was through scent. After what felt like a lifetime, the dog was close enough to touch. It stood right next to the man's leg, its head hanging low. It was waiting for a shove, a yell, or a sudden movement. It was waiting for the rejection it knew so well. But the rejection never came. The man slowly, very slowly, moved one hand. He didn't reach for the dog's head. That can be scary for a nervous dog. Instead, he offered his hand, palm up, right in front of the dog's nose. He let the dog sniff his fingers. The dog sniffed the hand, its wet nose touching the man's skin. There was a moment of pause, a heartbeat where time seemed to stand still. Then the dog leaned its head forward and rubbed its cheek against the man's hand. It was a small movement, but it meant everything. It was a surrender. It was the dog saying, "Okay, I trust you." The man didn't pat the dog roughly. He didn't scratch it hard. He simply closed his fingers gently over the dog's head, his touch feather-light. He stroked the fur between the ears, feeling the warmth of the animal. The dog let out a breath it felt like it had been holding for hours. The trembling stopped, just for a second, replaced by a feeling of relief. The dog leaned into the touch, pressing its body against the man's leg. It was seeking warmth, seeking contact, seeking the connection it had lost. A few people walking by noticed what was happening. They saw the famous actor sitting on the dirty ground, petting a stray dog. Some of them pulled out their phones to take a picture, but the man didn't look up. He didn't pose. He didn't care about the cameras. His entire world had shrunk down to this one small life. He looked at the dog with intense focus. He saw the matted fur, the dirt on the paws, and the sadness in the eyes that was finally starting to fade. He whispered a few words so softly that nobody else could hear. They were just gentle reassurances, telling the dog that it was going to be okay. The dog, sensing the genuine kindness in the man's voice, did something unexpected. It sat down right next to the man's thigh and rested its head on his knee. It closed its eyes for a moment, finally allowing itself to relax. The man didn't push it away. He kept stroking the dog's back, his hand moving in a slow, rhythmic pattern. He was anchoring the dog, giving it a safe place in the middle of the spinning, chaotic city. This wasn't about the dog being a good boy or doing tricks. This was about two living beings finding a moment of peace together. The man had bridged the gap between human and animal using nothing but patience and empathy. He had sat in the dirt and offered his hand, and the dog had taken it. The bond was forming, fragile as glass, but strong enough to hold. The dog wasn't just a stray anymore, and the man wasn't just a stranger. They were two souls looking out for each other, if only for this brief moment in time. The man smiled a small, private smile, feeling the weight of the dog's head on his leg, knowing that he had made the right choice to stop. Even though the dog had stopped trembling, the man knew that just petting the animal wasn't enough. He looked closely at the creature and noticed the details that had been hidden by the fear. The dog's ribs were showing slightly through its scruffy fur, and its nose was dry and cracked. It was clear that this little friend hadn't had a decent meal in a long time, and certainly not enough water. The city was cold, but the thirst was a different kind of heat that the dog was feeling. The man realized that to truly help, he needed to take care of these basic physical needs. Trust was important, but survival came first. He gently moved his leg, signaling to the dog that he was going to stand up. As soon as the man shifted his weight, the dog flinched, pulling its head back and looking up with wide, scared eyes. The panic was right there, just below the surface. The dog thought, "Here he goes. He is leaving me too." The man saw this instant reaction and stopped moving immediately. He leaned back down and spoke in that same low, rumbling voice. He didn't use specific words, but the tone was clear. He was making a promise. He pointed a finger at the dog, then at the ground, and then to himself. It was a silent agreement. Asterisk, stay here. I will come back. Asterisk, he stood up slowly, keeping his eyes on the dog the whole time. The dog didn't run, but it watched him with the intensity of a hawk, ready to bolt if the man turned toward the street. The man didn't turn toward the street, though. He turned toward a small metal cart parked on the corner where a vendor was selling pretzels and drinks. He walked only a few steps away, staying within the dog's line of sight. The people at the cart were busy serving customers, but when they saw who was approaching, they paused. The man didn't stop for autographs or photos. He politely asked for a bottle of water and a plain pretzel, nothing on it. He pulled out some cash from his pocket, paid quickly, and took the items. The vendor looked surprised, probably wondering why a big movie star was buying a plain pretzel and water on a cold afternoon. The man didn't explain. He just nodded a thank you and turned back around. When he walked back to the dog, he didn't walk straight at the animal. He approached in a curve, a wide arc, which is less threatening to animals than walking straight at them. He crouched down again, opening the bottle of water. He didn't have a bowl, so he did the only thing he could do. He cupped his hand and poured some water into his own palm. The smell of the water reached the dog first. The animal's nose twitched and the ears perked up. The man held his hand out, steady as a rock. The dog leaned forward, sniffing the water in his hand. Then, carefully, the dog began to lap up the water from the man's palm. It was a strange, beautiful sight. A famous actor, wearing an expensive coat, letting a dirty stray dog drink from his hand. The dog drank greedily, its tongue moving fast, splashing a little water onto the man's fingers. The man didn't flinch at the cold water or the rough tongue. He just poured more from the bottle, keeping his hand full until the dog had drunk its fill. When the water was gone, the man took the pretzel. He broke off a small piece, making sure there was no salt on it, because he knew salt isn't good for dogs. He held it out. The dog took the piece gently, almost respectfully, chewing it quickly. The man broke off another piece, and then another. He fed the dog slowly, making sure it didn't eat too fast and get a stomach ache. For the first time that day, the dog's tail gave a tiny wag. It wasn't the happy, excited wag from before, but a wag of relief. The dog wasn't just a stray anymore. It was a guest being fed by a friend. While the dog was eating, the man reached out with his other hand. He touched the dog's neck, feeling for a collar. He had to know if this dog belonged to someone who might be looking for it. He hoped to find a metal tag jingling there, a name, a phone number, something that would explain why this animal was so sad. He carefully parted the fur around the neck. He felt the leather strap of a collar, but when he checked for tags, his fingers touched nothing. The collar was empty. His face fell a little. This was the worst confirmation. If there were no tags, and the dog had been left there on purpose, then this dog was truly alone. There was no owner coming back. There was no lost poster going up tomorrow. This dog was homeless through no fault of its own. The man looked at the empty spot where the tag should have been, and a look of determination hardened his features. If the world had abandoned this dog, then he would be the one to fix it. He couldn't just leave the dog there, not now that they had bonded. He knew he couldn't take the dog into a movie set or a hotel room easily, but he couldn't walk away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The crowd around them had grown a bit, people sensing that something special was happening. Phones were up, cameras flashing, but the man blocked them out. He focused entirely on the call. He dialed a number and waited. When the person on the other end picked up, he spoke urgently but quietly. He didn't talk about who he was or what movies he was making. He talked about the dog. He explained exactly where they were, right down to the street corner. He described the dog a small terrier mix, scruffy, male, friendly, but scared. He asked for help. It sounded like he was calling a local veterinarian or an animal rescue worker he knew. He wasn't asking for favors for himself. He was advocating for the voiceless creature sitting at his feet. While he was on the phone, the dog finished the pretzel and sat down. It looked up at the man with a look of pure adoration. The dog didn't understand the phone call or the plan. It only understood that this tall, kind human had given it water when it was thirsty and food when it was hungry. The dog leaned its body against the man's leg. Closing its eyes and sighing deeply, the man finished the call and put his phone away. He looked down at the dog and scratched it behind the ears, a genuine smile finally crossing his face. "Okay," he whispered to the dog. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." He didn't say it loud, but the conviction in his voice was strong. He stayed there on the curb, one hand on the dog's back, guarding it against the rushing crowds. He wasn't going to move until he knew the dog was safe. He had turned a moment of pity into a mission of mercy, and he wasn't going to leave until the job was done. The minutes ticked by, and the air grew colder as the afternoon began to fade. The man didn't check his watch or look annoyed at the wait. He stayed seated on the curb, his body acting as a shield between the small dog and the rushing pedestrians. Every time someone walked too close, the dog would flinch, but the man would gently stroke its back, a constant rhythmic motion that seemed to say, "Asterisk, I've got you. I'm right here." Asterisk, it was a quiet vigil in the middle of a noisy city. The dog, sensing that it was no longer alone in the world, had stopped shivering. It was curled up tightly against the man's leg, absorbing his body heat, watching the world go by with tired eyes. The bond that had formed in such a short time was unbreakable. They were just two survivors looking out for each other. Finally, the sound of a van approaching broke through the noise of the street. It wasn't a flashy car or a police cruiser, but a simple vehicle marked with the logo of a local animal rescue. The man tensed slightly, happy that help had arrived, but also knowing that this meant he would have to say goodbye. The van pulled over to the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking orange. The driver, a person wearing a warm jacket and a kind expression, stepped out and walked over. The man stood up slowly, careful not to disturb the dog. He didn't waste time with greetings or introductions. He didn't ask for a selfie or try to use his fame to get special treatment. He immediately started explaining the situation in a low, serious voice. He told the rescuer exactly what he had seen, the man walking away. The dog chasing him, the moment the dog realized it was abandoned. He pointed out that there was no collar and no tags. He mentioned that he had given the dog some water and a bit of food, and that the dog seemed gentle but scared. He spoke about the dog with such care, as if he were talking about a cherished friend, not a random stray he had just met. The rescuer nodded, listening carefully, and opened the back door of the van. A blanket was laid out on the seat, making a soft nest. The man looked down at the dog. He knew this was the tricky part, getting the dog into the van without it panicking again. He didn't want to drag the animal or force it. He wanted the dog to feel safe. He crouched down one last time and looked into the dog's eyes. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "Time to go. You're going to be safe now." The dog whined softly, not wanting to leave the safety of the man's side. It pressed its head against his hand, begging him not to leave. The man's heart broke a little at that sound, but he knew he couldn't keep the dog. He had done his part. He had stopped the cycle of abandonment and found help. Now he had to let the professionals take over. With a gentleness that defied his size and strength, the man slipped his hands under the dog's belly. He lifted the animal up effortlessly. Holding the dog close to his chest, he carried it to the van. The dog didn't struggle. It didn't try to jump down. It trusted him completely. It rested its paws on the man's shoulder, looking back at the sidewalk where its old owner had disappeared, and then looking at the man who had saved it. There was a moment right before he placed the dog inside where the man paused. He buried his face in the dog's scruffy neck for just a second, breathing in the smell of the street and the animal. It was a moment of pure connection, a silent goodbye. He leaned into the van and placed the dog gently onto the soft blanket. He made sure the dog was comfortable and had enough room. As he pulled his hands away, the dog let out a small bark, a confused sound asking why he was leaving. The man didn't turn away. He stayed by the door, keeping his hand near the dog's nose, letting the animal lick his fingers one last time. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice cracking just a little. "You're going to a good home now." Once the dog was settled, the rescuer closed the van door with a soft thud. The sound was final. The man took a step back, his hands now empty. He watched through the window as the rescuer climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. He stood there on the sidewalk, the cold wind blowing his hair, watching until the van pulled out into traffic and drove away. He didn't leave until the vehicle was completely out of sight. He wanted to make sure the dog was really gone, really safe. As the taillights of the van faded into the distance, the man let out a long breath. He rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them up. He looked at the spot on the curb where he had been sitting. It was empty now. Just a dirty patch of sidewalk in a big city. If someone walked by right now, they would never know that a life had been saved there. They would never know that a heart had been mended. He adjusted his backpack and checked his pockets. A few people in the crowd who had been watching the whole thing whispered and pointed, realizing who he was. They expected him to wave, to smile for their cameras, to acknowledge that they had witnessed his good deed. But he did none of that. He didn't look for applause. He didn't want a round of clapping. He didn't save the dog for attention or to be called a hero. He did it because it was the right thing to do. He did it because there was a creature in pain, and he had the power to stop it. He turned away from the curb, pulling his coat tighter around himself to block out the chill. He put his head down, falling back into his own private world. He walked past the people staring at him, moving with the same steady rhythm he had when he arrived. He disappeared into the stream of pedestrians, just another anonymous soul in the city. The story didn't end with a grand speech or a trophy. It ended with a simple act of decency. The man walked away, leaving the dog on its way to a better life, and leaving the people who saw it with a warm feeling in their chests. He proved that you don't need to have a lot of money or a lot of power to make a difference. You just need to care enough to stop. You just need to be willing to sit on a dirty curb and offer a hand to someone who has lost hope. As he vanished around the corner, the city kept moving. The cars kept honking, the people kept rushing, and the noise continued. But the world was a little bit better than it was an hour ago. A dog was safe because one man decided to stay. And as he walked away, he didn't look like a movie star. He just looked like a good man, quietly saving the world, one small act of kindness at a time.